All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome in. So today's a big day, right? The Jets are interviewing a handful of candidates for their head coaching vacancy, and we take a look at the current interview list right now for this Jets squad. They've already interviewed Ron Rivera, Mike Vrabel, Rex Ryan, Matt Nagy, Aaron Glenn, Mike Loxley, Steve Spagnuolo, Darren Reese, Jeff Ulbrich, Vance Joseph, Arthur Smith, and Bobby Slowick. So based off of that list, who do we have left? Now, the Jets still have to interview Brian Flores, Jeff Hafley, Joe Brady, Josh McCown, and Joe Witt, right? So 5 guys still left on this list here. In other words, right, this list is wrapping up. Now, of course, things can change. The Jets could put in, another interview request. Obviously, we're leaving no stone unturned here. We're going to the collegiate ranks and seeing what's going on there, right? Defensive guys, offensive guys. It's all over the place, right? It's all over the place. And right now we take a look at who's the favorite. It's Aaron Glenn. It's been Aaron Glenn for weeks. This is the candidate with connections to the organization. This is someone with connections to Mike Tannenbaum. The Jets have also interviewed 3 GM candidates that have direct connections to Aaron Glenn: Chris Spielman from the Detroit Lions, Lance Newmark from the Detroit Lions, and of course Brian Gain in his early days with the New York Jets. So obviously Aaron Glenn is doing well, and of course it's not just the Jets that he's linked to, it's the New Orleans Saints. Of course he's linked to Jacksonville, he's linked to the Raiders and the Bears, but it really feels like it's going to come down to those 2 teams, the New York Jets or the New Orleans Saints. And the Saints have a pretty good shot of landing Aaron Glenn. Now, the timetable of this whole thing is, a little weird because the Lions are still in the playoffs. The Bills are still in the playoffs with Joe Brady. But that's why we're seeing the Jets interview guys like Arthur Smith and Vance Joseph and Brian Flores, right? The guys that are out of the playoffs. With Glenn, with Joe Brady, I'm not even going to include Ben Johnson into the mix here. And I guess for that matter, we can throw in Matt Nagy, Steve Spagnuolo, and Bobby Slowick into the mix. But the timelines to interview these guys are a bit different than, the guys that are currently out there. But before we dive in, I did want to give a special shout out to today's video sponsor, SeatGeek, the #1 rated ticketing app. Over 70,000 live events, football, basketball, live concerts. Funny enough, I was actually on SeatGeek yesterday trying to gauge the ticket prices with MLB spring training games, because that's going to be coming up here in a little bit, something I'm really excited for. And also just being down in Florida, I have access to so many different spring training stadiums. In any case, SeatGeek has the cleanest layout with the number rated system, right? Where, you can look at tickets that are rated as an 8, a 9, a 10. They're shaded in green. You're getting a good deal, as opposed to the ones that are rated 1, 2, 3, shaded in red. Not so good of a deal. That's based off of, of course, price, but also position within the stadium. And if you use code Jetscentral, you'll get $20 off your first purchase through SeatGeek. So thank you for sponsoring the video. So personally, I'm really excited to see who gets brought back for second interviews with the head coaching search. That's when things are really going to start to pick up. That's when the rumors are really going to start to fly. And we know, okay, you know what? These guys are meeting in person. These guys, could potentially be checking out the facility. Things really start to move, and we're approaching that time. It's going to be so exciting. And yesterday we did a video talking about the general manager candidates that I personally would love to see get brought back for a second interview. Now, the Jets have interviewed like 14 or 15 different GM candidates, and I think a fair number is like 5, 6 guys being brought back for second interviews, longer interviews, more in-depth questions about the roster, about the culture, about the vision, about the future with this football team. It's tough to gather all that information in a couple hour Zoom interview. Right, a virtual interview. It's tough to, especially if you don't know the parties, right? If there's no prior connections, it's tough to gather that information. So, if you can walk away impressed with someone, early on in the process, and say, hey, you know what, there could be something here. Let's get this guy in for a second interview and not waste time here. The 6 general managers that I kind of narrowed the list down to, and again, I'm not right. This is not being what's reported. This is just my personal opinion. And granted, I'm not sitting in on interviews. I don't know if they smash it out of the park. I don't know if they bombed it. Who knows? But the 6 guys that I have the most interest in at this point in time, John Eric Sullivan from the Green Bay Packers. Man, I would love it if the Jets were able to land him. Mike Borgonzi, Brian Gain, Chris Spielman, Darren Muji, and Lance Newmark. Those are the 6 guys for me that I think are just worth being brought back, worth diving into the roster, the future a little bit more here. As far as head coaches go, so with head coaches here, I kind of wanted to do something similar where we take a look at the guys that, again, have been interviewed or are set to interview with the Jets, and kind of come up with that list of second interviews or guys that I would think are worth sitting down with a second time to, again, gather more information and really iron out these details on what could be moving forward. Quick little side note, though. I've seen a lot of people talk a lot about Mike McCarthy, right? And Pete Carroll's another one. Like, why aren't the Jets interviewing Pete Carroll? Why aren't the Jets interviewing Mike McCarthy? It's a two-way street. You know, I heard a quote the other day. It was actually pretty good. It was in regards to sports media, and it was, if something gets out, it typically benefits someone. I mean, it's Mike Tannenbaum and Rick Spielman heading this search up, right? 2 former general managers that know what it takes to get it done. 2 guys with a ton of connections around the National Football League. You know, they've interviewed guys like Jeff Ulbrich, Darren Reese, Mike Loxley, Ron Rivera. You know, of course they've thought about Mike McCarthy. Of course Pete Carroll has crossed their mind. You know, but again, it's a two-way street here. Another thing that's quite coincidental is a lot of the coaching candidates that are well qualified, well deserving to be head coaches out there, at least for an interview, right? A lot of those guys have connections to the Jets in a negative way. Right, we've heard people, again, talk about Mike McCarthy. Well, Mike McCarthy was a finalist for the Jets job and did not get it. Todd Monken, finalist for the Jets job, did not get it. Cliff Kingsbury really considered the Jets. It was down to the Jets and the Cardinals picked Arizona years ago. I'm going to say it's an extremely high chance that the Jets have interest or had interest in some of these candidates, and behind the scenes, behind closed doors, the candidates said, no, we're not interested. And that's okay. You know, it's you know, let's be honest, let's be objective. The Jets have a quarterback issue. The Jets have a culture issue. The cap isn't really in the best spot. The depth isn't really in the best spot. And there's also a handful of jobs out there. It's not like it's just the Jets and the Saints or the Jets and the Jags and that's it. Everyone has to fight and you know, essentially play musical chairs over these 2 jobs. No, the Bears and, you know, the Raiders are out there. Just tons of openings. And that's not even including the New England Patriots opening originally with Mike Vrabel. So, you know, I think, you know, when it comes to McCarthy, when it comes to Pete Carroll, when it comes to Todd Monken, we have to keep in mind that there's a very good chance that they said, hey, no, we're not interested. It's not the Jets being lazy. It's not the Jets, you know, not picking up the phone. It's not them saying, oh, you know what, we're too good for you guys. You know, Mike McCarthy, Pete Carroll, 2 established coaches that have, you know, so many wins under their belt. We're not interested in you guys. But we are interested in Mike Loxley, coming off a 4-win season at Maryland, or Darren Reese, someone with very limited interim head coaching experience, or to even interview a Jeff Ulbrich here. So I do think it's important to talk about, right? It takes 2 to tango here. I think all of the people that the Jets have interviewed for their head coaching gig, Spags, Vance, Arthur Smith, all of them, they have interest in joining the Jets. If that interview goes well, that coaching candidate would want to advance further into more detailed talks. So out of the guys that the Jets have talked to already, I think the 6 guys that I would probably look to bring back would be Brian Flores, Aaron Glenn. Those, to me, are the top 2 candidates for this Jets job. I would like to see Jeff Hafley get brought in for a second interview. Now, he has not even completed his first interview at this point in time. That hasn't been released to the public. I'm sure we'll get the Jets update on social media because they've been doing that. Like, once they complete the interviews, they put it out there. But I think Jeff Hafley is a really interesting option. Maybe you can argue he's a year away from being a head coach. You'd like to see him in that role for another season. But I still think he's worth a second interview, especially if there is that connection with John Eric Sullivan. You know, if we think about it, John Eric Sullivan was interviewed on January 14th for the general manager opening. 1 day later, on January 15th, the Jets now all of a sudden have interest in a direct connection to John Eric Sullivan and Jeff Hafley. So I'm going to assume that interview with Sullivan went pretty well. But outside of those three, I think Vance Joseph is worth a second interview, because he has that head coaching experience, because he's doing great things with the Denver Broncos. This is someone who seems to be able to roll out a solid defense year in and year out, no matter what the team is. One thing that's really impressed me about Vance Joseph this season, specifically for Denver, the player development on the defensive side of the football. I mean, we're seeing guys just emerge. Everyone was freaking out when Denver let go of Justin Simmons. They have guys like Riley Moss stepping up, Bonito, turning into a freaking dominant pass rusher here. Zach Allen, JFM, right, a former Jet, Jonathan Cooper, right? He's doing it with guys that aren't like, in other words, the Broncos aren't throwing mega deals at fantastic players. They're not trading for Myles Garrett and TJ Watt, and that's the reason why the defense is having success. It's not like they have back-to-back picks in the top 5 where they were able to land 2 stud defenders. No, he's stepping in and making it work with what this roster currently has, and we're seeing a constant improvement for, I want to say, the entire defense. Also, too, it's actually one of my favorite defensive schemes that he runs over in Denver. And because of that, you see the defense playing as a unit. It's not a me-first type of defense. If you play selfishly, the defensive play is potentially ruined. Right, if you don't set that edge, if you don't shoot that specific gap, if you get fooled or you try to pull off a selfish play for a statistic, the play's ruined. The play's ruined, and that potential incompletion, that potential gain of 1 or 2 can now get broken off for a gain of 18 or 20. And again, with this Broncos defense, you see them playing as a collective unit, which I think is really, really important, right? Player development, guys buying into the culture, guys buying into coaching. That's exactly what I feel like the Jets need. I'm not saying Vance Joseph is the perfect head coaching candidate. I'm just saying, let's bring him in for a second interview. And I also think Matt Nagy and Steve Spagnuolo are also worth bringing in for second interviews. Now, of course, the caveat, the Chiefs are still in the playoffs. If the Texans beat the Chiefs, now all of a sudden it becomes a little bit more easier to figure that out. But we've heard numerous rumors and reports suggesting Mike Borgonzi, he's a strong candidate with the New York Jets. He's obviously progressing with the Tennessee Titans opening. He's already sat down for 2 interviews with the Titans, so he's a finalist there. I also think Joe Brady is an interesting option as well. Much like Jeff Hafley, you can maybe say, okay, ideally you'd want to see like another year or 2, but the stuff that he's doing with Buffalo is just absolutely tremendous. He's been around great players, he's been around great quarterbacks, he's been around great coaches, comes originally over from the Sean Payton coaching tree. He's really carved out a fantastic resume so far in his NFL / college, college background here, clearly being a part of that LSU team with Burrow and Chase and all these guys. In any case, those to me are the guys that I feel as though are worth bringing back in for a second interview. I think you can maybe argue an Arthur Smith if you're hell-bent on going with an experienced head coach with an offensive mind. I think the Jets could bring him back for a second interview, but I think a lot of these candidates, right, it's just not the right fit, right? Ron Rivera, Rex Ryan's already out. Mike Locksley, Jeff Ulbrich, Bobby Slowick, Darren Reese. I think with Josh McCown, it's a little too early too. 2 years as a quarterback coach. I don't know that. I think the Jets are just a huge job dealing with headlines, dealing with ownership, dealing with expectations. I understand that Josh McCown is someone who knows the Jets. He played for the Jets. He is a former quarterback. He's been around so many different offensive systems, so many different coaching staffs, and he's doing a great job with the Minnesota Vikings. I think right now I would rather see McCown in an OC type of role with the Jets before just giving him that ginormous promotion going from QB coach to head coach. Unless, of course, he completely blows you away. The Jets are not... The playoff drought, not being 500, we are not in a position to enter these head coaching and general manager interviews with preconceived notions on who is and who is not going to be getting the job. Yeah, you could have a favorite in the mix. Yeah, you could have excitement to go talk to one guy over maybe another guy, but there needs to be an open-minded approach, and I think that's what the Jets are doing exactly because of how many people the Jets have interviewed so far. So anyway, let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it, and as always, go Jets.